What's up, everybody? This is Charlie Potter, senior team writer of BamaOnLine.com. And Blake, it's been a busy week, my guy. It's been the first week of fall camp. I wrote it down just because it's a lot. We went to at least part of, let's say, 18 total viewing periods, but 6 practices. We've heard from Kalen DeBoer and both coordinators, Kane Womack and Ryan Grubb, twice apiece. And then we had a media day earlier this week on Monday where there, I think, was 40 plus people available over like an hour time frame. We actually pulled Andrew Bone away from recruiting to come and help us out because we had to cover so much ground. So the first week of fall camp is in the books. It's been a busy one, and I just kind of want to take this opportunity on the show to kind of recap some of our thoughts, what we've seen, what we've learned, what we've gathered, and then also Alabama practiced earlier this morning on Thursday. This is Thursday, August 7th. They'll practice again on Friday, and then they'll have their first scrimmage on Saturday, which will be up at the stadium. We won't get to watch it, but we'll hear from Kalen DeBoer. So we'll preview that a little bit as well. But I guess when you look at the first week of preseason camp, a lot of people are obviously going to be wondering about the quarterbacks. So we'll start there. I know we kind of took a while to get to it on our last show, but we'll start with the quarterbacks today. And honestly, it's kind of been status quo. We've heard from Kalen DeBoer twice. Like I said, we've heard from Ryan Grubb twice, and they've had good things to say about all 3 quarterbacks. They talked about how the reps have been broken up, and it's really just splitting reps. I think at this point, everybody's gotten reps with the 1s and 2s. Ty Simpson's the only one that hasn't gotten reps with the 3s, which I think says a little bit. But just from hearing from DeBoer and Grubb, and when we've been out at practice and made the trek around the practice field to get to the quarterbacks, what have you seen? What have you kind of taken away from that?
I mean, kind of like you said, it's been very status quo. And anytime that we've kind of been on the field and watching the order that the quarterbacks are taking snaps in, we don't see any live work with the 1s or 2s or anything with full team stuff, but we see drills while we're out there watching. And every time we see that, it's the same order. It's been Ty Simpson, then Austin Mack, then Keelan Russell, which really goes in order of experience. You've got your oldest guy in Ty, and then Mack's been there for going into his second year at Alabama, third year in college football. And then you got the true freshman in Russell. And so really normal from everything that we've seen. And I don't think we've necessarily heard anything that from DeBoer or Grubb that's changed how we view this room. They've had good things to say about all 3 guys, which you would expect because we knew they were high on this room as kind of in totality going into this fall. I did think it was interesting, and you already brought it up, that Grubb said that Ty Simpson hasn't taken any third-team reps. It's just been reps with the 1s and 2s. So if you want to read into that, I think that does kind of say what we already kind of knew, was that Simpson is leading this competition, and he seems to have a good hold on it. That I feel like we're going to have to see a lot done from Austin Mack or Keelan Russell over these next couple of weeks, especially in these 2 scrimmages for Simpson's kind of lead on the competition, so to speak, to really be threatened, because it feels like he's kind of doing a lot of things both in practice and kind of off the field from a leadership standpoint that both players and coaches have talked about to have him continue to be the leader, so to speak, in this competition. At this point, it almost feels like when rather than if Simpson gets named the starter. But again, that's not really new information. That's kind of how we felt it was going to be coming into this fall.
Yeah, I think we mentioned on the last show, but Ryan Grubb used the word command when talking about Ty Simpson. And I think when you're looking at his development, his maturation, that's big for him. I think the leadership element that you brought up is something that has kind of been pretty constant when people talk about Ty Simpson's, just the way that he's kind of stepped into more of a leadership role. We heard that early in the spring, just guys getting added to that leadership council, and Ty being one of them. So I think he's been consistent. I think he hasn't really turned the ball over. When we hear from the coaches about all 3 quarterbacks, you kind of hear the same thing. But I guess, from a consistency standpoint, that's what you want to hear. But, Austin Mack has an elite arm talent. But I think Keelan Russell's had a good week. I think he's a guy that his playmaking ability is very clear. It's easy to see, and these coaches are taking note of it. I do think with Keelan, I think he would probably be generating a little bit more buzz, or maybe making more of a move if he was a little more consistent. I know I sound like a broken record a little bit, but you got to take care of the football. And I think if he were in the system as much as Ty Simpson or Austin Mack, just his knowledge of the offense would probably help him out a little bit more too, because he's still doing a good job, but has some room to grow in that area. So quarterback, status quo. I think when you look at maybe a timeline, you got this first scrimmage this weekend, then you got this second one on August 16th. I would be shocked if early that second week, kind of the last week of the preseason, so that Monday would be like August 18th. They don't practice that day. I wouldn't be shocked if that's when we hear something about a starter, at least for week one. So I would stay tuned for that. And when you look at the rest of this team, Blake, there's still some position battles out there. I think we've been interested a little bit in that offensive line. I know you've written a lot about the left guard position, but it's been more maybe right guard here of late, because Cam Dewberry has been with the ones. And we've been out there, and I know you can't just like take everything we see as the gospel out on the practice field during those viewing periods, but it's been Gino Vandermark with the ones and Jaden Roberts with the two. I have some thoughts on that, but I wanted to get yours first. When we've been out there and we've seen kind of that maybe abnormality of what we expected going into preseason camp.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because, Jaden Roberts is a guy who is very highly regarded as a player in general going into this season. He's going into his third season or could be his third season as a starter. And he's gotten like preseason All SEC. I think he got a preseason All American nod from the Sporting News the other day. And really, whenever we've heard DeBoer talk about this offensive line, and he said at media days that there were 6 guys kind of in their rotation, we assumed you slot Roberts in at right guard where he's been the last couple of seasons. You slot Formby in at right tackle because they're thin at tackle, and he kind of seems like the guy that stepped up there. And then you have Dewberry and Vandermark rotating and battling for left guard. But like you said, this week we've seen things that are a little more interesting, where Vandermark and Roberts have been kind of rotating at that right guard spot. And it's been Roberts that's been with the twos. If anything, I think it could be the fact that the coaching staff might want a little more consistency out of Roberts. And really also, I think people forget that last year, Roberts and Vandermark rotated a whole lot. And Roberts started and played most of the season. He dealt with some injuries, but even weeks where he wasn't necessarily hurt, Vandermark had a pretty decent year from a practice standpoint and did enough to earn himself snaps. When we talked to Coach Cap, back when we talked to assistants during the week before games, people would ask him about Gino, and he said that he's done things in practice to be able to earn reps. It's not necessarily the fact that Roberts is hurt or he needs to be out there for some other reason. He earned those reps. And so I think Gino has had a good fall camp, and that's being shown by what we're seeing with him getting some reps with the ones. But I think it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to watch both guard spots and see if, maybe they keep Dewberry at left guard, they keep Roberts at right guard, and then they keep Gino as kind of a floater who can rotate at either one, or if one person really grabs a hold of each guard position and then you kind of have a set 5. We really don't know how that's going to shake out, and that's going to be interesting to watch once the season comes around to see how they handle those 3 guys who it now seems like 3 guys vying for 2 spots rather than just the 2 guys vying for left guard as we maybe thought a week ago.
We've seen a guard rotation in the past. When Tyler Booker was a true freshman, he was kind of coming in. I think it's like Emil Ekiyor would get 2 series, and then here comes Booker, and then he would come off the field, and then he'd go in at right guard for a little bit. So they can move some guys around, and we've seen that at different spots. We've seen it more recently with the inside backers. To start last season, they did some with the corners, just some rotation early on. So it's possible. But to me, I think more than anything, it says that kind of what you were talking about, the coaching staff trusts Gino Vandermark. And I don't think it's as much of a slight to Jaden Roberts, even though you're right, that consistency element from him, it needs to rise a little bit. He needs to be more consistent, and he's a mauler when he's on. Jaden Roberts looks like $1 million. He's a first off the bus kind of player, but he needs to do that for a full 60 minutes. And if he can do that, this offensive line can be really special. And they have a guy they feel really good about on the bench, but I think it's a situation where I feel like they think they have 6 starters, and I think it says a lot about Cam Dewberry that he's kind of playing a ton at left guard. But I don't think you can count out Geno Vandemark, and I don't think this is necessarily something where they're trying to light a fire under Jaden Roberts, but it might, and I think that could be a good thing. So a lot just of interesting, maybe unexpected wrinkles on the offensive line room. And that's kind of pretty much it offensively from a starting standpoint. There's some depth question marks and not really concerns, just more so how are they going to get all these guys on the field. But when you look at the defensive side of the ball, I think it kind of starts at Husky. And it's been Deshaun Jones pretty consistently. He's been the guy since really bowl prep at that slot defensive back role. But we've seen Cam Calhoun get some more reps there. He's a guy that's kind of bounced back and forth between corner and Husky. Drake Kirkpatrick Jr. is another guy there. But I think for me, like, we know Tim Keenan is the man in the middle. We know James Smith is expected to take that next step. But those spots behind them, they need some guys to rotate in that interior defensive line. And I know you wrote about what Kane Womack said after practice this week. Just where do you think that stands from a depth standpoint for those interior defensive linemen?
Yeah, I think you've got your top 2 guys there on the interior defensive line with Tim Keenan, who Womack just gushed about the other day and spoke very highly of. I think it's hard not to when you know that Keenan has been around the program for a lot of years. I think this is fifth. Is this his fifth year? Fifth year. And so he's been around a long time. He knows the program, and he's a leader, vocal leader, spiritual leader. He's been called for this team, and just a huge talent up front. And then James Smith is a guy who we talked about before on here. We've written about him before, just a guy that a lot of people expect a breakout season from. So you've got your 2 likely starters at defensive tackle. Behind them, Kane Womack talked about Jeremiah Beeman as a guy who he said he's grown up very fast. And whenever I was going in to write that story about Beeman, I had honestly forgot that Beeman was a true freshman last year. And he hardly played leading up to the bowl game. I think he played in 2 regular season games against Wisconsin and LSU. And that was kind of the only action he saw. So he redshirted, but then he got action in the game against Michigan and looked pretty good. Had 2 tackles. I think he had a quarterback hurry, like made his presence felt in the limited snaps he got in that game. And Womack really just talked about how fast he's grown up and how much further along he is now than he was a year ago, just more so than they even thought he could be. So he's a guy that could absolutely step up as a rotational piece along the interior defensive line. And then there are other guys too, like Edric Hill, who saw a little bit extra playing time last year, now is going into his redshirt sophomore year. So he could get a few more snaps. And then you even have a guy like Florida transfer Kelby Collins, who came in. And a lot of us thought he was initially going to be a bandit and play out on the defensive end. They got a pretty deep bandit room, which we may or may not talk about here on this show, with LT Overton at the starter. And then behind him, Womack has talked about Jordan Renaud and Keon Keeley as guys behind him. So Collins has worked both at bandit and interior defensive line. And so he could be a guy that could come in and play on the interior if they need to at depth. It's kind of an unknown behind Keenan and Smith. You have guys who haven't gotten a lot of playing time in the past, or haven't gotten a lot of playing time at Alabama in the past, but you have names and guys that could contribute, and certainly some talent that can be tapped into behind those 2 guys as they continue to get experience.
Yeah, Cavante Henry with that bandit room too. That's a group that I don't want to say it's necessarily like a position battle, but they've got a lot of dudes that I think could contribute, and some of those guys might be called upon to play some interior snaps. I would be a little surprised if we see Keon Keeley in the middle, but it's not out of the question. He's the heaviest guy in that bandit defensive line room right now, which I don't think we expected to say that a month and a half ago. So I think the defensive line's in a good spot. They just need some of those young guys to step up. And then lastly, with these position battles, just specialists. I mean, it's a thing that I think wasn't on people's minds maybe so much in the spring, earlier in the summer, but it's kind of ramped up, and now people are kind of worried about it a little bit. I think Connor Talty's kind of established himself as that place kicker. I talked to him at the media day on Monday, and he seems like his head's in a good spot too, which I don't want to say half the battle. He thinks it's 90% mental and 10% physical from a place kicking standpoint. So I think the fact that he's placed point of emphasis on that is big, and it sounds like he's been pretty consistent. I think Jay Nunez says he's right at 90% on kicks through preseason camp. I'm sure they haven't been chip shots. I'm pretty sure they challenge him out there. Snapper, seems like David Byrd is kind of the guy there, the Cal transfer, and he has that experience you're looking for. But a couple of walk-ons, I think Alex Rozier and Jay Williams, who actually traveled for Alabama last year, have also gotten a look. But I think it's probably Byrd there. But I wanted to ask you about punter. That one feels the most open to the three. They got big shoes to fill with James Burnip moving on. We haven't got to see the punters or really any of the specialists at practice. It's just not how those media viewing periods work. But when we've heard from Kalen DeBoer or just kind of looking at that battle, where do things stand right now for punter?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because it's still kind of wide open, and you've got two guys who seem very capable. You've got Blake Dowd, who transferred from Colorado School of Mines Division II, and he had a good average there, and averages that were somewhat similar. Kalen DeBoer said to the numbers James Burnip was putting up. And I mean, I can never get over how highly Kalen DeBoer has spoken of James Burnip. Anytime that he's been asked about punter, I feel like he'll bring up Burnip and be like, man, like Burnip was one of the best or the best punter he's ever coached. So high praise for Burnip as he's out possibly trying to win the Saints starting punter job right now, which is pretty cool.
Preseason NFL football, baby.
But then you've got Alex Asbruhoff, which is a freshman, one of the top rated punters in the country. And so he's another guy who's got the chance to kind of win this punter job. And I think that's going to be an important position battle. One that I'm definitely interested to hear some about from this scrimmage and kind of see how these guys end up performing. Because, I mean, we've seen Alabama football over the years, what a good punter can do for you and what a bad punter can do for you, especially in a league like the SEC where every yard, every snap is going to matter, and little things like that can flip a game. So it's still up in the air as far as kind of where things stand right now, but definitely one we're watching.
Before we move on to the scrimmage, I just kind of wanted to talk about some guys who maybe caught our attention, maybe who we think are trending up a little bit. And I know you just talked about the punter. I'm going to make you talk some more because we've both written about this guy, but he's fast as hell, Rico Scott. So what did you gain from talking to him? It seems like to me, like it's clear who Alabama's top three receivers are: Ron Williams, Jeremy Bernard, and then Isaiah Horton coming in. But I might be surprised if it's not Rico as the first guy off the bench when they play Florida State on August 30th.
I'm at the point where I would be surprised if it's not Rico Scott as the first guy off the bench. Just every single thing I hear about Rico Scott and just talking to him, I just get impressed more and more with him. He's a great guy to talk to. Like we got to talk to him at Media Day for the first time in his Alabama career on Monday for Media Day, and he was just an impressive guy, very humble and very kind of focused and locked in, was just kind of the vibe that I got from him. He said he learned a lot as a freshman. He said he learned kind of how to sit back and watch because, he said coming from high school, like you play every snap and you're not used to coming in and, sitting behind guys and not playing basically an entire year. But now he's kind of focused and ready to go. And we've heard a number of things about him. Jamarcus Shepard, the wide receivers coach, when we talked to him at Media Day, talked about how he can be used really all over the field. He said inside and outside. He said he can be used at running back.
Watch out.
Yeah, which would be crazy to see. And then we also heard from Jeremy Bernard that he clocked over 23 miles an hour this summer. So he's one of the fastest guys on the team. I asked him if he was the fastest guy on the team. And he deferred to Latsier Brooks on that, which is also pretty exciting to think about what he could be once he gets back from his little minor injury that he's dealing with. And then we talked to Ryan Grubb, and he said that as this Alabama wide receiver unit is really adopting this kind of blocking mentality, they want to be a unit that's strong at blocking on the outside, blocking for the run game, for the screen game. He said that the guy in the spring that they were watching that they would point to and say that guy, that's how it's done, would be Rico Scott. And so he's one of the fastest guys on the team. He's setting the example for blocking as a redshirt freshman in the room. Shepard's talking about using him all over the field. So just everything we hear about this guy is just really, really strong feedback. And so it makes me really excited to see him on the field and kind of get to show some of these things and get the opportunity to do it. And really just shows how deep this wide receiver room is and how good it could be going into this year.
It's super deep. And like, I think I'll be interested to see how many they use, but a guy like Jalen Hill is also great to see him out there. He's moving well too. He's getting some reps. We see kind of like at practice, you see the X, Y, and Z kind of split into 3 groups, and we've seen Jalen Hill running first up through some of those. So he's a guy I think is getting closer and closer to be ready if he's not already. Still got a brace on his knee, but from a wide receiver standpoint, another guy that's good to see out there. I'm going to go with Marshall Pritchett at tight end. And so we've seen Josh Cuevas and Danny Lewis be a little limited through these first 6 practices. That's to be expected. Danny Lewis missed all of spring. Josh Cuevas, he's a guy that later in the spring suffered an injury. And I remember, I think I passed Josh Cuevas downtown right after spring ball ended, and he was in a big cast. So he's a guy that's coming back. They're doing things, but they're taking it easy with those guys. I think they'll be ready to go. But when we've watched those tight ends go through like routes with the quarterbacks, it's been Marshall Pritchett up first. And they've got Brody Dalton going to his 5th year of college. They added Jackson Marco. They had Jay Lindsey, who kind of kept the room together late in the spring last year when everybody went down. But Marshall Pritchett looks the part. Caleb Edwards is another true freshman. It's just a mammoth of a human being. But Marshall Pritchett isn't lost out there. He's added a ton of weight since he got on campus. And I think he was kind of viewed as more of the receiving tight end in this class, and Caleb Edwards is more as the blocker. But both can do both. And I'm going to be fascinated to see kind of just his progression and where he goes from here. He's someone that's kind of at the top of my list to ask about next week coming off this first scrimmage. So that tight end room is interesting right now because the top guys aren't out there, but I think some of these young guys are taking advantage of those opportunities. And defensively, we kind of talked about it before the show. It's such a veteran group that it's kind of tough to pick a young guy. Beeman would be one that I think you look at him and you see the way he's kind of transformed his body. He's added good weight. He's moving around well. But somebody that's actually come up a couple times in press conferences is Noah Carter. And that Wolf linebacker room, right now, Quay Rousseau has been a little banged up, but we know from Kane Womack, he's the freak of the freaks in terms of guys on this roster. You also got Jamarian Latham in that room. You got Yanze Pierre coming back. Those are kind of the top 3 guys in that room, but Noah Carter sounds like he's kind of taking that next step.
Yeah, it does. It sounds like that from what we've heard from Kane Womack. I mean, he's talked about Noah Carter twice now, and once in each of his press conferences, and just has been really impressed with the progress he's made. He's a guy who I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think he was Kalen DeVore's first recruiting commit, or at least one of, because he flipped from Washington to Alabama in January, shortly after DeVore got the job.
It was like him and Ryan Williams were right there. Those were the last additions to the class. Yeah.
Both of those guys were last additions. And so he was kind of one of the first guys that they brought on to really be a Wolf in this system and recruited to be a Wolf. And he's 6'4", 242 is what he's listed at. And he's, really making good progress according to what Ken Womack has said. And really what we've seen, he looks the part out there. That's for sure. That whole Wolf linebacker room really looks the part. And so they've also got a bunch of interesting kind of different body types because Quay Rousseau, I mean, Womack called him a freak, and physically he looks like that. But then Jamarian Latham is obviously on the bigger side because he kind of moved over from Bandit. But then Noah Carter is a little slimmer than those guys, but he's quick twitch and going to be quick off the edge. And so I'm interested to see if he ends up earning some snaps. It's a deep room, and it's a little harder with a unit in a position like the Wolf whenever they're only playing one guy at a time. Kind of same with Bandits. Outside of specific packages, you're only going to have one guy on the field. So you've got a kind of a clear top 2 with Quay Rousseau as the returning starter, and then Latham some depth moving over. But then him battling it out with Yanze Pierre for seeing who gets snaps after that is going to be interesting to watch. And he's certainly, put his best foot forward from what we've heard from Womack so far.
I think it's good that you're hearing some positive buzz around Noah Carter because Justin Hill looks the part too. Like he looks like a true freshman that could
dude's
play
massive.
in
It's
year
crazy.
one. So the fact that Noah Carter isn't just being forgotten, and we've actually seen him go first through outside backer drills, which again, I've said it. I've tried to say it like in every practice report I've written. This isn't the gospel. A lot of these, it's just random. Like good luck trying to figure out the defensive line order if you're watching individual drills because it's going to be Tim Keenan, LT Overton, and then take your pick. But like some like the offensive line, maybe receiver, quarterbacks especially, like it's you can tell you can learn a lot from it. I think for me, like it's been fascinating to watch the inside backers. Because Deontay Lawson's been back. We haven't really seen him be very limited at all. Now, granted, we haven't seen them, do many contact drills. They've done, some wrap-up tackling and stuff when we've been out there. But a lot of just the individual, the footwork, read and react things the inside backers has been doing. Lawson's been out there and participating. But I think I'm really fascinated to see what Justin Jefferson can do this fall. I know you talked to him at Media Day, but you bring in a guy like Nikhai Hill-Green, and I think he can add a lot to this room. But Justin Jefferson finally getting kind of that opportunity to be a starter, not because of injury, I think could be huge because he's a guy that can wear the green dot. You basically can have two quarterbacks on the field if you have 0 and 10 out there. So I'm also fascinated about the depth there with Caden Jones and QB Reese kind of battling for that fourth spot. You got the true freshmen who all looked the part. Duke Johnson actually walked in with Dijon Lee to Media Day, and of course, like they can't talk, but they were trying to like get their teammates to crack up, and that dude looks like $1 million. So it's a room.
The whole freshman class does really physically, they all look amazing.
And like you need those guys at inside backer to start to develop and learn some things, learn from these guys because they're going to be called upon next year. That could be a position where Alabama looks in the portal to add help, but you've got two guys in Jones and Reese. They're going into their second year. You've got 3 talented freshmen. You've got some guys in this class that are going to be on campus either in the spring or summer that can contribute. But the guys on campus now, like they need to learn as much as they can. So it's going to be a big year for them. They're going to play a lot on special teams and things like that, but they can learn from some good dudes like Deontay Lawson, Justin Jefferson, and like Nikhai Hill-Green. But we'll wrap this up kind of looking ahead to the scrimmage. If you've made it this far, give us a like and subscribe on YouTube. If you're listening on via podcast, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating review. We greatly appreciate it. Heck, if you're listening and you haven't joined BOL, now's a great time. You can do it for a week for $1. And look, that gives you a year, I think, of The Athletic as part of your membership to On3 and BOL. BOL's adding like huge names left and right. Josh Pate's come over. You got Ross Dellinger being a weekly contributor. So On3 is the place to be right now ahead of football season. But I think a lot of attention now is kind of turning to this first scrimmage. So for you, Blake, outside of the quarterback, because when we hear from Kalen DeBoer, when we hear things from the scrimmage, what are you most anticipated or most interested to learn about? What's a group that you kind of have circled in terms of that has your attention going into this first scrimmage?
I think I'm really interested in how, when we mentioned it a little earlier, but how these receivers kind of shake out, because obviously, like we've said, we have the top 3. We might have the top 4. With, Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard, Isaiah Horton. Interested to see how Isaiah Horton does, for one, because he's a guy who we've heard a little bit about, but he's another guy who physically really fits the mold. I mean, 6'4", 215, can kind of do a little bit of everything. And then Rico Scott. But then behind them, like we've said on this show and written, like there are a ton of guys who could possibly contribute. We heard a lot of good things over the past week about Jalen Mbakwe, when we thought maybe for a little bit that he had kind of potentially been left behind in that receiver room. And then, Kalen DeBoer comes out and Ryan Grubb comes out and they say that he's had making big plays and doing things to make his name known. Jalen Hale, like you mentioned, Cole Adams was a guy who was getting snaps last season in the receiver room, dealt with some injuries, but he's an explosive player kind of in his own right. And he's there. You've got just a long list of players at receiver. And so I'm interested to see kind of who steps up behind the starters and also kind of interested to see how many of these guys are really contributing, and maybe if that gives us any indication into how many receivers they're going to be kind of actively rotating and playing once the season comes around.
This is one of those scrimmages I wish we got stats, which we haven't got stats in several years. But just to see how full that receiver box score column is. For me, I mean, it has to be the offensive line. And it's kind of hard for scrimmage that we can't watch to really glean a whole lot. But just in terms of like who's getting reps to the ones, how often are they rotating guys at guard? Honestly, I'm fascinated to hear about the second team because hearing from Ryan Grubb earlier this week, he had a lot of good things to say about Jackson Lloyd and Michael Carroll. Mike Carroll's a guy that's been the second team right tackle pretty consistently throughout preseason camp. And I know our boy Nick Kelly shared a clip of him just embarrassing a walk-on after messing up his first rep. I know that's made the rounds on the board. Nick was giddy to get that on social media and get that paycheck for it. But it's a situation where the depth at tackle is something we've talked about all off season long, but it sounds like those freshmen have come in and done a nice job. And also Olasolinen, he's a guy that he can play basically every position but center. I think he could probably play center if he needed to, but we've seen him kind of at tackle here of late. He's been at both. So just the depth there. And a guy like Casey Poe, we don't talk about him a lot. I know he's someone of interest on the board, but watching practice on Wednesday, our last viewing period, it kind of looked like he was being used as a sixth offensive lineman, almost like a pseudo tight end. And we've seen guys like Kendall Randolph and Brandon Green kind of do that in the past. So maybe that's a role for him. That would be a way to get on the field and to provide some extra beef up front. And it's not to say the tight ends can't do it, but if you can have an offensive lineman you feel comfortable doing it, why not? So that's for me offensively. It has to start with the offensive line. What about defensively for you? Is there a group that you're eager to learn about on Saturday?
I'm going to go a different direction a little bit. Not necessarily a group, but a player. I am interested to see where Cam Calhoun spends most of his time on Saturday because the entire kind of time we've seen him in practice, he's been swapping even like while we're out there, like every period, and sometimes in the same period, swapping which group he's with between corner and Husky. And we know he's a versatile player. We know he's capable, and kind of seems like a guy that the staff just really wants to get on the field in some capacity. But to see him working with both corners and Huskies, he's a guy who I would be interested in where he kind of spends the most time this Saturday, whether that's with corner, as a backup behind Xavier Brown and Damani Jackson, or if he's competing with Deshaun Jones for Husky snaps.
I like that. I think that's someone that we've been interested in since he got on campus, just because he played a lot at Utah, and Utah's got a good defense. So he contributed there. I think he led the team in pass breakups last year. So Cam Calhoun is definitely someone that we're interested in. And for me, like, I want to say the pass rush, but we know the quarterbacks are in black, so like they can't really do much. Like, it's going to be tag off. So it's a situation where – for me, I guess I would go – I'm going to talk about a group we haven't talked about as much, because in a situation like a scrimmage, these guys can make a lot of plays, whether it's in run support or maybe picking off passes. It's the safeties. And we know what Bray Hubbard and Keon Sabb bring to the table. I'm interested in see, like, is Sabb a guy that is 100%? Is he fully participating? He's looked pretty good when we've watched him out there. He's talked about being, healthy and going through drills, but does that open up the opportunity for a guy like Zay Mincy, who I think had a good close to the season last year? You've got Cam Howard, who's coming back into the program. You've got Ivan Taylor, who's looked good as a true freshman. Drake Kirkpatrick's been more in the slot, so he's not really among that group. I think he could be maybe first off the bench at that Husky position, but just the depth at safety. I tried to ask Kane Womack about it after Wednesday's practice, and he gave a great answer, but no names, just in terms of who's sending out depth-wise. But it's a group that most of the time whenever you have these scrimmages, the inside backers and the back end of your secondary are maybe who you hear the most from. So not only just the guys up front, because we know what Bray Hubbard brings to the table. When healthy, we know what Keon Sabb can do. But some of these younger guys at safety, that's what I'm interested in. So we'll be back next week. We'll have plenty to talk about. We won't be going back to practice for a while, not just us, but everybody. That's kind of how the schedule laid out. Is very front-loaded from a media viewing standpoint. But We'll be here from Kalen DeBoer on Saturday, the coordinators next week, and getting ready for that second scrimmage, which really indicates that football's back, baby. So stay tuned. We'll be back next week. And if you can find us, or you can find us on the BOL Roundtable, we'll always be there. So see you guys in the next show.